Yeah, my partner should be here in a second.
Hi, do you mind sending both of your emails so that I have the judge's email.
They're both in the chat.
Okay, great. I sent the chain. I'm gonna go get water. Oh shoot, sorry. I sent it to your old email. To your at Blake School. I'll send it to your U Chicago email.
It's fine because I still get it through Blake Docs.
Okay, cool.
So
Okay, my bad.
it's somewhere in the void of space, but that's fine. So we're at start time. Doesn't mean we have to get started now if not everyone is here yet. But just to make sure, I have Quarry Lane first Aff and Whitman second neg. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
And I think we're good, right, Sana? All right, I'm just gonna send a speech doc, and then we should be good to go.
Just give me like an extra minute because I'm trying to figure something out real quick.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine. Docs in the chat. Wait, are we good or?
I'm really sorry. Just
No, you're all good. You're good.
another
Just,
minute.
yeah, just let me know when you're ready to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure something out with like another round, and I'm like asking Tab about it. Okay, yeah, we could just start.
Okay. Hmm. We affirm contention one is the economy. Legalization of drugs grows the economy in two ways. The first is cannabis. Claim 20 rights and national legalization in the U.S. could result in $128 billion in tax revenue and estimated 1.6 million new jobs. As Christian 21 explains, that workers could be needed to farm, process, distribute, and sell products. There would also be opportunities for secondary industries. The second link is policing. The DPA 21 finds that governments have poured over $1 trillion into the war on drugs. Swisher quantifies that about $50 billion a year could be saved if drugs were legalized. The impact is COVID recovery. Crane finds governments will be looking for new sources of revenue to replenish dwindling budgets and provide jobs to millions of Americans who find themselves out of work. Contention 2 is combating disease. Subpoint A superbugs. Currently, use of marijuana stops drug resistant bacteria known as superbugs. Sample 20 writes that CBG was potent in killing superbugs. There is much work to do as antibiotic resistance has become a major threat to public health. That work is research. As Eric 20 furthers, researchers who investigate medical benefits are frustrated as the law prohibits them because cannabis is still illegal at the federal level. Legalization of drugs is the best solution. Becker 14 writes, legal marijuana may yield incredible innovation and be the future of the pharmaceutical industry. Only legalized cannabis can save us now. People 21 concludes that drug-resistant infections and could result in 10 million deaths by the year 2050 unless treatment is found. Subpoint B, psychedelics. Barker 16 finds that psychedelics are powerful psychoactive substances that do not lead to dependence or addiction. These are critical to combat mental health illnesses. Oaklander 18 furthers that psychedelics can help relieve anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addiction. Unfortunately, they aren't accessible right now. Work 21 explains that the only one state has decriminalized psychedelics, and drugs are still illegal federally. Affirming solves. Elite 21 finds that legalization of psychedelic drugs would broaden access to research. With legal access, a wider range of research from a wider range of sources would be possible. The benefit would be global. General 11 explains the first step towards universal legalization is the U.S. The price is determined by American markets, and the U.S. is a good candidate because other nations follow its drug policies. Thus, Nathan 21 concludes that mental health disorders have 8 million preventable deaths every year, and only psychedelics have shown potential to treat these disorders. Subpoint C is HIV. Prohibition drives the spread of HIV, as Advert 19 finds that criminalizing the use of drugs discourages users from accessing harm reduction, which forces people to avoid carrying new needles and use share one instead. He concludes that people who inject drugs are 22% more likely to acquire HIV, and despite the increased risk, they are among those who are with the least access to HIV prevention, treatment, and healthcare. This is because drug use is often criminalized and stigmatized. Affirming allows for safe usage, no stigma, and access to healthcare seen historically. Clay 18 finds that in Portugal, a legalized country, shifting from a criminal approach to a public one had dramatic results. The number of HIV diagnoses caused by injection had plummeted by more than 90%, as seeing people with drug problems as people with illnesses can put a person in the framework of the healthcare interventions. Prevention is key, as the CDC quantifies that without medical care, HIV leads to AIDS, which kills 13,000 people in the U.S., and Roser 19 further that HIV kills 1 million people worldwide each year. Contention 3 is mass incarceration. The war on drugs is rooted in subjugation. Topic 21 explains that Nixon's own policy advisor revealed that the war on drugs had become as a racially motivated crusade to criminalize Black people. African Americans are disproportionately incarcerated. Jones 21 explains that Caucasians and African Americans' usage of drugs is almost at equal rates. African Americans account for 90% of drug inmates and are likely to be incarcerated 57 times more than Caucasians for drug offenses. AB 17 continues that drug arrests compound social and economic inequalities and unfairly deny millions of people the opportunity to support themselves and their families. However, affirming solves that the ADF 21 writes that drug legalization removes all penalties for possession and personal use of a drug. Sun 21 explains that because communities of color are the ones that are disproportionately borne the brunt of the drug war, passage would result in 95% reduction in racial disparities in drug arrests. Mass incarceration ensures a racial hierarchy, as Western and Mueller 13 explains that historically high rates of incarceration have transformed the nature of social and economic inequality in America. Mass incarceration reestablished the subjugation and incomplete citizenship of African Americans. Thus, Quarry Lane is proud to affirm.
Okay, oh shoot, it's sending it to the mail delivery subsystem, not to the chain. Okay. Let me know when everyone gets it. It's just gonna be here. I'll let Sophia go through it.
So it's gonna be a K that you can flow where you'd flow our case, and then just direct implications to their case. I will signpost. It actually shouldn't be that difficult, I don't think, and it's also gonna be pretty slow. Is everyone ready? Sounds fantastic. We negate. First, a K. Criminal justice reform is carceral devolution. The act shores up the carceral state's legitimacy and extends the geographic reach of penalty by blurring the spatial borders between the prison and the communities outside its gates. Story 19. Despite representing themselves as critics of mass incarceration, their effect is to extend the power and influence of the carceral state, its rationalities, as well as its technologies into communities and neighborhoods outside the prison gates. Mass incarceration constitutes an expression of shifting state strategy in the management of racialized urban poverty. The fact that it is urban, poor communities of color that bear the consequences of state interventions positioned as ameliorations of incarceration must be analyzed within the broader framework of neoliberal state building and urban restructuring. Alternatives are a form of repackaging mass incarceration. However well-intentioned they might be, and however much they purport to change existing penal practices, they ultimately serve to perpetuate the culture of punishment. Simply relocating new forms of state intervention out of the prison and into the community does not in itself mark a transformation of the carceral system. The major result has been to increase rather than decrease the total number of those who get into the system in the first place. Alternatives become not alternatives at all, but new programs which supplement the existing system or expand or else expanded by attracting new populations. Insofar as such restructurings have deepened rather than abated, the lasting effects of these initiatives forged under the imperatives of neoliberal prison reform will be only to blur the borders between the space of the city and the space of the prison. They do so by extending the power and influence of the carceral system into neighborhoods, further absorbing the family, the school, and various community agencies into carceral social control. The spatial diffusion of carceral violence is fundamental to the operations of American militarism and imperial racial violence across the planet. Rodriguez 08. Encompassing carceral violence has been central to the global dominance of the U.S. U.S. global power works through the institutionality, state violence, and social ordering and disrupting logic of the U.S. prison regime. The logic of bodily domination that crystallizes in the regime of the American prison is fundamental to U.S. state-mediated and state-sanctioned violence at all sites across the planet. Within the enactment of hegemonic U.S. projects that stretch across the world with increasing force, a logic of carceral violence has become inseparable from the conceptual and military apparatus of global Americana. The American prison regime plays a central and amplified role within the emergence of a militarized American global legitimacy ordained by breathtaking military capacities and deployments. The mapping and remapping of the prison as a specific arrangement of state-mediated domination and global dominion also situates the prison as a constituent of the current global order. Vote neg for a critical countermap of the AF. Mapping the spatial exclusions created by AF amplifies radical activism. Gill 18. Critical mapping offers ways to identify hidden connections in order to visualize them all for collective scrutiny. It connects places that are typically encountered as discrete, but that have been caught up in the same process of marginalization and exclusion, such as prisons and low-income neighborhoods of color. Finding, demonstrating, and understanding connections and what they give rise to are crucial to challenge them effectively. We cannot begin to deconstruct the carceral state if our conceptions of what is and what is not a part of it are wrong. Critical mapping of carceral circuitry, aka the correct definition of prison boundaries that we advocate for, affords the production of new visions from the margins of and against the development of carceral circuits. With that in mind, move on to their case, specific implications off of all three of their contentions. First, on financing, look specifically to their policing link. The argument is simple. When the state no longer has the ability to put people in jail based on drug charges, they have to look into other ways in order to put people in jail or create new mechanisms of social control that expand the realm of the prison. Because they are expanding the realm of the prison into communities inherently, they are making it bigger and taking up more capital and resources, which means that you never see the benefits of economic growth on either of their contentions because the prison one subsumes it. Second, move to diseases. They tell you that low-income people of color in these communities are those who have the least access to life-saving cures. This is also just true if you look at the status quo. Inherently, when you are bringing these people into the carceral system, you are cutting off more of their resources, which means that they have even less access in the long term. You're never voting for that. But then on the war on drugs, the argument is extremely simple here. They say that drug arrests going down is a good thing. We tell you per the K that when you are decreasing the state's ability to put people in jail one way, they expand their ability to do so. When you try to reform prison rather than simply taking it out entirely, you are never going to be able to actually solve. You just see more people being looped into the system. Youth for Cross?
Yeah, I'm good. Could I get the first question?
Yeah, for sure.
What's the alt of your K?
Redefine what you view as the prison and as the community. We're basically asking you to go back to the drawing board and start over before we can actually propose a solution.
Go back to the drawing board in terms of what? Like in terms of what is prison, or in terms of...
Yeah, so what the Gill evidence tells you is that when you are proposing a solution that is basically saying we will remove one of the state's mechanisms of control and say that that has a long-term effect in decreasing the prison population, that is an incorrect assumption that actually just leads to more people being looped into the state's carceral mechanisms because they just have to go out into the communities in order to A, find new ways to imprison people, but B, change what the boundary of a prison is so that people are imprisoned within their own communities, or at least functionally imprisoned within them. And so so if when you do our alt, you reject this conceptualization that decreasing the prison population just on face solves incarceration or the state carceral system, and instead you are voting for a critical countermap of it, which views the state for what it actually is, which is a constantly changing actor finding new ways to imprison people and expand and shore up the like carceral system. And doing that is critical to actually deconstructing it in the long term. You have to shift the mindset before you can propose solutions. But can I take a question?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about disease.
Sure.
So you all talk about stigma decreasing for HIV medication because that medication is legal, right?
It's that and needles, correct?
Sure. Can you prescribe an illegal drug?
Can you prescribe an illegal drug? No. At least it has to be legal on the state level. Why?
People get prescribed HIV medication right now, right?
Sure. It's not about access, like the legalization of HIV medication. It's about stigma surrounding drug use. It's not that they can't access it. They choose not to because they think that drug use is a terrible thing. But when you affirm, your mindset shifts from like one of the criminal system to one of the healthcare system.
So you're saying that there's a stigma right now around people taking prescribed legal medications?
Our link is specifically about needles. The stigma about drug use is what increases shared use of needles, which transmit HIV more rapidly.
Oh, okay. I get what you're saying. You can take a question.
Yeah, let's talk about the implication on our like first argument, right? So why would every single tax dollar go towards the police? Like that's just not realistic and that's never happened.
I mean, in the status quo, that's largely what you see. Like even if it's not realistic, quote unquote, that's what we see happening. We see tax dollars going to A, the prison industrial complex, and B, the military industrial complex, which per the Rodriguez evidence, I believe, are actually one and the same because they both use the same mechanisms of control, just one is abroad and one is domestic, which means that even if you don't see it going into domestic policing, you see it going into the same systems that are operating abroad, which means on net, you're not saving any money because the state always wants to have control. But that's cross anyway.
Okay, we'll take prep and then I'll put up my timer when we start. And then okay, that was 154 used. It's just going to be down the K and then the Lincolns on our case. Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. First, the permutation. We can still talk about removing people from prison through drug reform while also remapping our understanding. It doesn't have to be one comes before the other. The jail evidence says that that we must we must remap our understanding first. But I would say that doesn't matter insofar as still spreading discourse about the war on drugs and also talking about the people who are affected by the war on drugs is actually creating change. But then because and I'll get to their warranting on why that it doesn't create change on our C3. But second, even if we do abolish prisons and drugs, abolish prisons, drugs are still criminalized, which means that there's still legal standing for police to target people of color and arrest people of color on the charge of drug possession. Which means that by getting rid of drug possession, even if we do remap our understanding, we still must get rid of drug possession, or we must still legalize all drugs to get rid of that reason that police have to arrest people of color. But then they say that their alt is to redefine what the prison community is, so that has no impact. But the problem is that has no impact outside the debate space, because first they say that the system is so inherently racist and always devotes funds and money towards the prison military industry complex and to fund racism. But the problem is that if that's true, then what we need to be prioritizing is the actual short-term social change that we can make, and we would say that we do that significantly better than them, because in the short term we because we're debaters acting as mini policymakers, we're in the context of the round, we're getting these people out of prison, and they're changing the boundaries of what prison occurs way in the future. We at least provide a short-term solution, but also because we are understanding the legislation and policy, we can actually use that outside of the round to do to further this activism, because we're understanding what the impact of legalizing drugs has on people of color. So we can use that to solve for incarceration and spread awareness about the issues. However, in their solvency, there's no solvency outside the debate round either. But then onto their Lincolns. First, on econ, they say that the states can't put people in the state, that we're inherently just making the problem worse, because the money is always going to be funded or the money is always going to be shifted. But the problem there is that there's no way that both Democrats and Republicans right now are going to agree to spend so much money on funding the police. Literally, when one party wants to defund the police, that's why we in Oregon, when drugs were legalized, we didn't we saw it because of social movements and because of pushback. We didn't see that money going towards funding the police, and that's why also in Colorado, where when drugs were legalized, we saw that money actually going towards drug education. But then secondly, even if there are more cops, less regulation still means that there's no legal standing to arrest those people, which means we still outweigh on a prereq, because even if the police is funded, those people still can't get arrested. But then they say on C2 of diseases that we would be decreasing access to drugs. We would say that as long as we are on net are still decreasing the amount of people who are in prison, which we do through our C3, then their Lincoln doesn't matter. But then on C3 of war on drugs, they see that we decrease the state's ability to actually arrest and expand the other way. But the problem here is that their warrant is about increased regulation, basically. But the problem is that even if a new law comes out tomorrow, it would only be on a state level, which means that these laws don't affect everyone, but mass incarceration does. And we are solving mass incarceration to a greater degree than it's being solved for right now, because the government shifts from the issue of criminality to an issue of health. So even if people are pulled over, they won't be sent to jail, but rather through a rehab center, because we're changing the mindset on the way drugs are used and on the way drug laws are enforced on people of color as a whole. Thus, we urge a strong AF vote. Thank you.
Do you mind repeating the response to our link into the C2? I didn't catch it.
Oh yeah, I just said that as long as we decrease then the number of people in prison, we're also linking in to whatever your linking was.
Okay, cool. I'll run prep starting now. Okay, everyone good? Negative. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Start on the top of the neg. They read a few responses. They seem to fundamentally misunderstand our argument with the perm. They say that they can remap their understanding while still also advocating for their policy. Our argument is that their policy of short-term criminal justice reform just leads to more people being caught in the web of policing because the state expands its reach. So now it doesn't just target the people who are being incarcerated in prisons, but instead it targets the entire communities writ large, and those communities all become prisons in and of themselves. That means that I guess they could do the perm, but they're also sacrificing like a bunch more people being added into the criminal justice system, to access the perm. It doesn't make sense. Also, they just say that it doesn't matter. That the guilt evidence says that remapping has to become before any criminal justice reform, because their discourse creates change for a warrant that they read on their C3, then they don't read the warrant. So you don't have a reason why their discourse about the war on drugs actually creates any sort of change by the guilt evidence that we must critically remap our understanding before we take any actions. Then they say that drugs will still be criminalized after abolition. Another solid misunderstanding. First of all, we're not advocating abolition. We're advocating rethinking of that everybody goes back to the drawing board and rethinks the way that we engage with the criminal justice system and how we understand what is and isn't a prison. It's literally just changing our mindset. Secondly, if people were arrested after prison abolition, where would they go? They could arrest people for drug charges, but they wouldn't be put into the carceral state because the carceral state doesn't exist anymore. Then go down to the alts. They read a bunch of stuff. First, they say that we have no impact outside of debate. Then at the bottom, they say that they're changing the world outside of debate because they did research. We did research too. Their discourse is equal to our discourse. If they get a link, we get a link too. But even so, we're not going for that link. We just say all of us inside this round changing our mindset is enough to make change. They introduce a criminal justice reform plan. We get to have a methods debate about which criminal justice reform is better. We say our criminal justice reform is better. That's enough to pick us up. Then they say to prioritize short-term harms without a warrant as to why they're more important. The time frame doesn't matter. What matters is how many people are being harmed. Way more people will be harmed when the community writ large is created into a prison. Also, we say our short-term is just equal to theirs. They just assert that it's longer. Then they say basically that they're just going outside the round doing activism. I already responded to this. So could we based off of our K. Let's extend the K. Story says that their advocacy extends the influence of the carceral state into communities by forcing the state to adapt and adopt new mechanisms of social control. Empirically, per Rodriguez, alternatives only repackage mass incarceration at home and abroad. Mass carceral tactics are only solved by our alt, which is the foundation, are the foundation of American imperial violence. Per Gill, the alt is a mindset shift. You must correctly remap your understanding of state carceral politics as ever evolving to control how you see low-income communities inside and out. But you do that by negating. Gill tells you that it's critical to ever stop the violence. Go to the app. At the top, independent of all of the Lincoln's debate, the K just turns case. It's a direct criticism of how they engage with the topic and their arguments, which means that it's a prior question to resolving any of their arguments. First, you have to resolve the K, but then let's get into the line-by-line debate. First, on policing, they say that we won't fund the police more. It doesn't really matter. It's a straight turn. Even if police funding remains exactly the same, if they're still policing other neighborhoods, whether funding increases or decreasing, their link is dependent on funding decreasing, which means that they never get access to their link. Also on time frame, it doesn't matter. They can't prove that their thing will happen fast enough for COVID recovery, so they don't get an impact here. Go to the C2. Sophia does this very clearly in constructive, and they don't really have a response. She says that we short circuit access before they can actually develop these drugs. So if drug development takes about 10 years and we have like these entire communities being policed into prisons, they don't get access to all of this new innovation. They just say if they decrease the number of in prison, they also link into this. They don't decrease the number of people in prison because the prisons themselves expand. We good for cross?
Yeah. Question?
Sorry?
Can I take the first question?
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the warrant as to why prisons are expanding?
Like in your world?
Yeah, because isn't that the K? It's like like us talking about it this way expands prisons, right?
Yeah, so I was just clarifying what you were asking.
Oh.
Basically, the argument is very simple. So criminal justice reform like functions as band-aid solutions where we think we've solved the problem, but in reality, the state has an incentive to find new ways to repackage mass incarceration, over policing, surveillance, all of the things that they do. So
But the state
basically,
always has
because
that
the state
incentive.
wants to continue doing that, it will continue doing it at any cost. And that's why we see entire communities becoming prisons.
Right. Isn't the problem with that mindset that if the state always has an incentive to continue being racist, even if we rethink it, how is the state not going to circumvent that change? Because you're telling me like the state is always racist, right?
Right. So if we rethink how we conceptualize what is a prison and what isn't a prison, then we can recognize the tactics of the state. Whereas if we don't do this critical counter mapping and we do, the AF? Yeah. If we don't do the critical counter mapping and we do the AF, then we're in the situation where the state is expanding their reach in their prison and nobody really recognizes that because people don't have the capacity to recognize prisons outside of the like traditional penal state. When
But the problem is that even if we do recognize the tactics of the state, what does that do if we can't change it, right? Like I can be like, these are the steps 1, 2, and 3. But if we can't do anything to change it, what does that recognition actually amount to? Because you're telling us
like
never
you
change
can't solve a problem without first recognizing it that it's a problem. We don't fiat through 100% solvency. We do fiat through that we are the only risk of the first step. The only risk of the first step
never solvable.
Sorry,
Like,
can I just finish?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. The only risk of the first step, which is understanding the problem in the first place, is voting for us. If we don't understand the problem, when the problem happens, like even if we couldn't solve it in either world, we're much further away from a solution. Does that make sense?
I mean, well, I just think the problem is that like the way that you guys have been phrasing it the whole round, it's like if we listen to this mindset, the problem is never going to be solvable because if the state has the power to circumvent any change, and if they're racist, like they're going to be able to circumvent any change. So any small change that we make is significantly better in the short term.
Okay, but either way, we are not like going for a solvency claim. What we're going for is preventing you, the AF, from making the problem actively worse. When many more people are like being policed because neighborhoods become prisons, that loops so many more people into the carceral and criminal justice system. So even if we can't solve it writ large, we still have a better chance of solving it by preventing it.
Confused just to understand like what you're saying. So you're going for this idea that if we talk about like incarceration in this round, we are making the problem worse?
No. If we do criminal justice reform that claims to have solved the problem of drug offenses and like mass incarceration, that makes the problem worse.
But we never claimed to solve the problem.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter what you claim. Also, you kind of do. Like if you read your evidence, you do make a claim about solving the problem. Even so, the problem isn't about how much you overstate your link. The problem is that with your link, the government has an incentive to go into these communities and over police the communities themselves.
Okay, that's gross. I'll put my timer up when we start prep again. Okay, that was 57 taken.
All right, the order is going to be the K, and then like how the K interacts with our arguments. So the straight turn, and then each individual argument. Does that go with everybody? they don't understand our responses. They say that the prison system and the military-industrial complex is extremely racist. Our argument is that there is absolutely no solution for the problem. Their uniqueness overwhelms the link. We're telling you that even if we remap our understanding of the prison system and we understand what the state is doing, they have power in the sense that it is never going to change. That is why you should be preferring short-term solutions. In the long term, they themselves say the prison system is super racist and nothing is going to change. That's really key. They say the only risk of solvency is voting for the negative, but no. When you vote for the act, at least in the short term, you are seeing less people being incarcerated, and in the long term, that never changes because the system is racist. Then they say that there's no warrant as to why there's short-term change, but there is. They drop the prerequisite analysis that we give you. We tell you that even if policing goes up and there's more police in policing other low-income neighborhoods, they have no legal standing to arrest them. So even if they're pulled over or even if they knock on their door, they don't actually go to jail. So that's why in the short term, we're actually seeing things happen. Then they say, on case, specifically on the econ analysis, they say that because they're a straight turn and we don't see funding go down, they still garner offense. But again, that's not actually true, right? Because even if funding, they basically concede funding stays completely the same because no political party or there'd be no agreement in Congress to increase funding the police, especially right now with social justice reforms where half of Congress is trying to defund the police. That if funding stays the same, we still have some offense because we're telling you that there's no legal standings for them to actually be arrested. On their C2 about reducing access, our argument is not access to medical innovation. Our argument is needles, and that is a stigma link that is completely separate to going to jail or not. If people are afraid to actually go out and buy needles because it's stigmatized, that only goes away in our world. But specifically, they never touch our responses to C3. The argument is very simple. We tell you that when you affirm, you're going to be reducing the amount of regulations that are currently in place to put people of color into prison, specifically those regarding drugs. That's really bad because they disproportionately affect people of color more than they affect white people. When you affirm, those regulations go away. So even if policing increases, we're going to see less people go to jail. They never respond to what Sahana tells you. In response to the case, she finds that basically the mindset is going to switch from a mindset of health to a mindset of a mindset of criminal justice to a mindset of health. So people aren't going to be going to jail, but also they drop the weighing that these regulation increases that come in their world, even if we're going to see increased policing, that only happens on a state-by-state basis. But on net, mass incarceration goes down because it affects every single state. So even if their argument is true and we're going to see an overcorrection, it's only going to happen on certain states versus our policy happens on a federal level. That means there's a slightly lower degree of mass incarceration in every state, and we have way on scope.
A second. Okay, hold on. Let me pull up my timer. Starting prep now.
It's going to be that was 20 seconds. It's going to be K case. K their case. Sorry. Is everybody ready? Start on the K. The argument is extremely simple. Per their advocacy, they extend the influence of the carceral state into communities by forcing the state to adopt new mechanisms of social control. When they can no longer imprison people for drug charges, they are forced to go out into the communities and blur the line between what is a prison and what is a community in order to exercise the same level of social control. Per Rodriguez, this empirically happens whenever we see things like short-term carceral reform right now. This happens both at home and abroad because carceral tactics are the fundamental foundation of American imperial violence. Our alt is really simple. Gil tells you that in order to ever see long-term carceral reform, you first have to rethink what you view as the prison and what isn't the prison and how you view the carceral state. Our view of the carceral state is that it is an ever-changing actor that is constantly able to adapt and put forth new social mechanisms of control. You have to do that first in order to adopt policies that actually counteract the state for what it is. They read through responses. One, they tell you that there's no solution because our uniqueness about the state constantly being racist overwhelms. One response. We never say that it can't be solved. Our authors never say that it can't be solved. Gil tells you that it can be solved, but first we have to change our conception of what the state is and what it does. We tell you you do that by negating because you change your view from the state as a static actor and the prison as a static thing to a state as an ever adopting actor or evolving actor so that you can adopt practices that's all for that. 2, they tell you to prefer short-term solutions. 1, we tell you that their short-term solution immediately leads to people being more so imprisoned in the short term. Per story, we see the prison expand out into communities, which in the long term draws more people into the system. More people are experiencing this carceral violence. 3, they tell you people don't go to jail for drugs anymore, which is a good thing. Per story, in their world, the prison is the community, which means that even if they aren't physically in prison, they are still experiencing the bodily domination and the carceral tactics that the state uses. It is equally as bad, and there are more people, so it's actually worse. With that in mind, move on to their case. Even if you wanted to vote here, they do not extend a link, so you absolutely cannot on a technical level. But 2, they have conceded that our K is a prior question to their entire argument because it is a criticism of their rhetoric coming out of this round that the state is a static actor, which has long-term effects in the real world and in the round. And 2, it is a direct turn-on case, which outweighs because it leads to more people being imprisoned. On the implications to their specific intentions, 1, on the economy, remember, they can see the analysis that even if you see a decrease in funding, you don't see it fast enough in order to actually solve back for COVID. They have no impact here. 2, on diseases, they fundamentally misunderstand our argument again. We tell you that we short circuit access to things like clean needles and medicine because the state is actively going out and oppressing these people. We gain full access to it because it is clean conceded. 3, on the war on drugs, remember, if we win our K, we win this argument very cleanly because if you buy the Rodriguez evidence, which tells you that when you remove one mechanism of state social control, they have to go and bring more people into the prison, that means that the problem gets worse on net, even if it is perceptually getting better. We tell you that perception of getting better is also harmful and a reason to drop them because it means that we are not actually conceptualizing the state carceral violence in the right way, which is fundamental per Gil in order to stop it in the long term. Very easy neg ballot. You all good for cross?
Yeah.
You can take first question.
Yeah, what's the warrant as to why the oppression of these people leads to a lack of access to things like needles?
It's pretty simple. People in prison right now, because they're experiencing the carceral tactics of the state that do things like dominate their bodily functions and prevent them from getting medical treatment. Like we all know that that's a big part of the reason why prison is bad in the status quo. We see that expanded out into communities. People are equally as dominated as they would be in a prison, which short circuits their access to things like vital medication. Even if you buy that it doesn't do it specifically for HIV medicine, you buy that it does it for basically everything else, which outweighs on scope.
Wait, no, I'm confused, right? So how would the state somehow insert control to the point where people can't leave their house to go to CVS?
Well, first and foremost, it's not that simple, especially in low-income communities. You don't see things like there being a CVS on every corner.
Okay,
like
that's just an example of a well-known pharmacy. There's obviously drugstores everywhere. Like
there aren't obviously drugstores
yeah.
everywhere. You can drive for like 20 minutes in Southeast DC without seeing so much as a grocery store. The state is actively cutting off people's resources. That's what they do, and it only gets worse in your world. But even so, if you believe that they have access to things that you would find at a drugstore, that doesn't mean that they have access to doctors to prescribe them prescriptions for things. It doesn't mean that they have access to a whole variety of things, especially when the state is actively suppressing that access.
It also doesn't mean that the state won't in the future make some sort of regulations to cut off or criminalize the access to things like needles. Because as we say, the state is doing their best to criminalize these communities in any capacity that they can post drug legalization. So responses on many levels. Can we take a question?
Sure.
You.
For sure. Let's talk about the economy. Your impact is specific to COVID, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we can't get people the money by the time that COVID is no longer a problem, what is your impact? Or we can't get the money infused into the economy?
A few things. One, like even the COVID is like can probably happen again relatively easily because of climate change, and there's new variants like all the time. But not even that
impact as it was read in case and throughout the round that isn't specific.
Correct. Yeah, we're just going for C3. I talked about C1 just to make sure that you garner no independent offense from it. Like,
yeah,
okay,
we're not trying to.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned it. That's all.
Yeah, cool. You can take a question then.
So what? Oh wait, no. What is the solution? Wait, does Gil propose a solution?
So
Yes.
Gil proposes the first step to a solution in the long term. Obviously, we're debaters in a singular debate round. We can't go into the nuances of the like mass state carceral system and solve all of that because there is no band-aid solution to that. It's a constantly adapting actor. What Gil tells you is that in order to ever have a solution to that in the real world, you have to first recognize what the problem actually is. Because if you view the prison and the state as static things and actors, you can't actually solve the problem because that's not what they are. But what Gil tells you to do is rethink your understanding of that, which you can only do by voting against policies that like tacitly put forth the notion of the state and prison as static actors.
More so even than solutionizing, though, what we're doing is preventing the problem from getting actively worse by voting out.
So, but that's us anyway.
Okay, we have, I think, 9 seconds of prep left, so I'll put my timer up. Okay, the order is just going to be on the K and then on RC3. Okay, is everyone ready? Okay. Start with the K. At the top, extend the idea that their uniqueness overwhelms. They just say that we have to be aware of the fact that the state is like a racist actor and is capable of shifting. We obviously are aware of that. That's why we are trying to solve for the racism that we can actually solve within the state. But then they say that they don't say that it's not a problem that can be solved for. But we're saying that like essentially by them like extending this like idea about the state. That's basically what they are saying, because when you like it's too hard to solve for a shifting actor because there's too many variables and there's like too much that we would have to think about and like potentially solve for in the future. So it's so much more probable and like so much more and so much like faster if you just solve for like what you are sure about right now, which is that when you legalize drugs, you decrease the amount of people who can possibly be arrested for possessing drugs. But then secondly, they say that prisons expand and that's bad. But remember our prereq analysis, which is that even if policing increases, it doesn't matter insofar as people cannot be arrested because there's no legal basis for those people to be arrested. But then onto like our case on econ, there's no offense coming off of their own diseases. Remember, if people in prison can't access the diseases, if we decrease the amount of people in prison, we also link into the impact here. But then on C3 of the war on drugs, that's going to be the easiest place to vote for us. That's because they just say that they're bringing people into prison. But remember, we're actually making it better. We're not just perceptually making it better, we're physically making it better, because since Black and white people use drugs at the like same rate, legalization is key because it removes the penalties for drug possession, reducing racial disparities in arrest. And the impact is actually ending the racial is ending the racial hierarchy because we make it better. They also never interact with our analysis about state versus federal regulations. Their warrant into like expanding the prison is that the state is going to like increase regulations. But again, remember, it goes completely dropped that even if a new law comes out, it would only be a state laws, meaning that these laws don't affect everyone, but mass incarceration does, because we solve mass incarceration on a federal level. Any regulation that they talk about is only by the state, and it differs from state to state. Thus we urge a really strong vote. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take a second to prep. Starting now. Okay. Everyone good? Or actually, I'll take one more second. Okay. Now I'm good. K, F. Okay. Let's start by extending the K. Their advocacy extends the influence of the carceral state into communities by forcing the state to adapt and adopt new mechanisms of social control. They view the prison system as a static actor. We view the prison system as a constantly changing and evolving actor. That's why empirically, per Rodriguez, alternatives only repackage mass incarceration at home and abroad. Mass carceral tactics, which are only solved by our alt, are the foundation of American imperial across the entire world, which means that our impact, regardless of the silly state-federal debate, is global and much, much larger than their impact. Then, per Gill, our alt is a mindset shift. You must correctly remap your understanding of state carceral politics as ever evolving to control low-income communities inside and out. You do that by negating. Gill tells you that this is the critical step to ever stop violence done by the carceral state. They read a few responses. First, they say that our uniqueness overwhelms and it's not probable to solve for. In final, they are the ones doing the defeatist rhetoric about how we could never solve the carceral state. We never say that. In fact, Gill says the first step to solving the carceral state is remapping our understanding. Even so, this is not a debate about solvency. This is a debate about preventing the app from actively making things worse, because the Rodriguez evidence says that every time we do some sort of criminal justice reform, it is immediately replaced by something that is worse and on a wider level. In this case, the story evidence tells you that communities themselves will become the prisons. That also responds to their thing about how people can't be arrested. It's reconceptualizing how people are imprisoned. Their communities themselves become prisons. They don't have to be arrested in the traditional sense to be imprisoned and controlled by the bodily harm of the state. Extremely clean on the K. The weighing on the F has been conceded literally since, I think, constructive or rebuttal, that our K turns case because it's a direct criticism of their rhetoric. It is a prior question to ever resolving their C3, which means the first thing you look at is the K. The K is super clean. Even so, on their C3, the only weighing they extend is the state versus federal thing. First of all, we have a much bigger scope outside of the US because our thing is global. But second, it's subsumed by our weighing. On the K, let's extend Rodriguez. It is very clear that even though they think they are physically making it better, we will replace one thing with a worse solution. That is the thesis of the K. Very simple AF ballot, neg ballot. Good round.
Good round, everybody.
Yeah, good round.
Does anyone need anything?
So we're good to head out then, right?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Good luck, y'all.